Welcome to the Monday, January 13th, 2020 Kubernetes SIG Apps. I'll go ahead into the chat here and share the agenda and notes for today. We have no announcement, but we do have two discussion topics. The first is the cron job GA cap. Is somebody on to talk about it? Is that you, Barney?
Yeah, I'm here. Thanks, Matt.
All right. And what did you want to talk about with regard to the cap?
Right. There were some comments on the cap, and I updated the cap like last week. And Jordan's here, Martin's here. We wanted to discuss, make sure the cap looks good so that we can go ahead and start implementing it. I'll share the cap in a minute.
Okay.
Can you see it?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Hey, Jordan, Martin, thank you for your comments. So I updated the KIP last week. I just wondered if we can quickly run through and make sure that this looks good, or if you have any other comments.
So I was reading this beforehand, and I do have one comment.
Okay.
And it's actually what somebody else had brought up, and it was in the implementation. I've lost my spot in it because I moved on from reading it.
Yeah, fair enough.
It had to do with the implementation and how it would be introduced.
Okay.
And I think that Ken and Janet had previously been talking about an alpha one. In fact, Janet refers to it in a comment from last year near the top of the document. And she said we need an alpha controller that goes alongside the current one that you'd opt into. And then after that's shown its way, then we could promote that to beta and replace the current controller with it.
Okay. So
and that's what she was looking for in the time. This is her comment from June 12th of last year.
Okay. Sorry, I think my internet is kind of wonky. I need to switch.
We might lose you if you switch. Or we might.
Yeah, I think I'm still here. Okay, so I had an answer for that. I had a question. So does it mean we'll have two controllers running for like two releases till we completely deprecate it?
Yes, this is Maciej. That was the original plan, that we will have both. And from the discussion that we had some time ago, the proposal was to have some kind of feature flag where you would be able to enable either. I'm not sure if both is feasible, and I think not. But each separately should be feasible. And on top of that, we also discussed the ability of running the entire E2E against each of the controllers separately to ensure that we maintain the functionality as is.
I see. Okay.
So I had a question about that. If I understand it correctly, the current proposal is not just to improve the performance, like to re-implement the controller on the existing API to improve performance, but also to add new capabilities in the API. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. So there are a few status fields, mostly status fields that we are adding. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Yeah.
So does that mean if there are two controllers that we would have to double implement support for all of those things?
That's a good question. So those are the questions I also had if we have two controllers. So I would think we would introduce the status only for V1 APIs. And we'll have the new controller targeting the V1 API and the older controller targeting the older objects. And as we deprecate and migrate, as we deprecate and migrate, we'll recommend the customers to move on to the V1 API, and then it'll get the new status automatically.
All right, that's not quite how API objects work. So any data that you have in any of the versions needs to be able to be round-tripped to the other versions
Okay.
so that it doesn't get dropped if a client does a get update in that other version. So
Okay.
if we add status fields, we would add them to the beta version as well as the V1 version.
So we don't have a choice but to double implement.
Well,
Honestly,
if we do the second controller approach,
Yeah.
was the concern around switching controller implementations the poll versus informer aspect?
Yeah, I think, yeah, that's correct.
Okay, because that seems like the kind of thing that could be, like if you have a single method that handles a cron job, and then you feed a cron job to it, either based on polling or based on like an informer with a enqueue method. It seems like you can switch the method without re-implementing everything about the controller.
Yes, you're right. That's probably what we'll end up doing when we implement.
Okay.
But is the consensus that we do need two controllers, one for the older V1 beta objects and one for the V1 objects?
So
no.
I would expect the controllers to work across the versions, basically.
So the way that we support controllers today, once we release the V1 API, the next release we can update the controller to speak to the V1 API. And so if you continue to implement against the V1 Beta 1 API, which needs to have the data present in order to round trip these new fields successfully. And then the release after we add V1, promote to V1, then you can switch the controllers to use that version of the API.
So,
so in functionally speaking, if I hear this right, we would probably add these fields as part of a V1 Beta 2 API, and we'd have two separate controllers. One you can opt in to use the new version, it would be alpha, and you wouldn't have both running, it would be one or the other, and they would both support the V1 Beta 2 API. And then,
well, these are additions. So these are additional, so they can be added to the V1 Beta 1 API.
That's true. They could be added to V1 Beta 1.
That's
You're right.
preferable if you need to add another version, if you're changing a default or you're doing something that's not compatible, then another version is required. But
no, that's true. You're right. And so both controllers would do that. And then if the alpha controller works well, and we work out the bugs on that, then that would be promoted to a beta controller, and the old controller could be removed then entirely, and there would be no switch anymore. The new controller would be in place, and then we would have that for a release. And once that all proved out with the new controller and the API, then all of it would be promoted to GA. Does that sound about right?
I still question whether we want entirely separate controllers or if it's just the queuing mechanism that needs to be able to use the old method or use the new method.
Oh, I see.
The concern was that the current the way the controller is currently written is tightly coupled with the old polling mechanism, and it'd just be easier for us to write a new controller. I'm not going to argue that it's feasible to work within the current one, but I'm not 100% sure. There's significantly more changes required with regards to scheduling. Maybe not necessarily with adding cron jobs, but it's more about when people start modifying. So imagine you have a current cron job that triggers every an hour, and you basically create a queue with the upcoming jobs so that they are served within the next hour, within 2, whatever. And then user comes in and he modifies that the current cron job to be run every half an hour. That basically means you need to find all the current occurrences in your other scheduling queue, the actual that is responsible for running the jobs, and change the schedule so that it is reflecting the current desire of the users. That's that part of the scheduling inside of a cron job controller will require significant rewrite, because in the current one, you are always polling and you are just reacting to the current time. Whereas with the informer-based approach, you need to react onto events happening on a cron job, but at the same time, you still need to schedule the cron jobs at the specific point in time without any modification happening in the cron jobs in between. So you need to, there's one queue, there's one, the informers part, and there's the actual queue and the actual scheduling when the jobs will be triggered. That's the tricky part.
I guess my expectation would be that the new implementation wouldn't be merged until it was well tested in all these scenarios, like with fake clocks and and if, like, I'm just trying to understand a scenario where we ship a second controller that operates on these additional capabilities, but we haven't tested it well enough to be confident in replacing the current controller that we know has significant issues.
So while the current controller has significant issues, I do want to point out that the controller is widely used in production. Exactly. So the issues with it are really, really well known. And so switching from one controller to another with something that's just widely used, I mean, we say our beta stuff shouldn't be used in production, right? But it's massively widely used in production today. And so that's one of the reasons that we'd like to take a little bit more care and handholding with it.
I mean,
yeah,
Jordan, basically
the issues are well known, but they're issues like we can schedule multiple jobs in pathological pattern.
Yeah.
It's not just the ones where, like, if you have more than 500 cron jobs, it doesn't behave well. It is actually like scheduling problems with the current one. If a node goes away and then comes back, we can schedule a bunch of jobs. Things like that I would expect the new controller to add test scenarios for.
Yeah. So,
right, but the problem is still the term between what we have currently and what we ship. And then at the same time, I would like to be able to, for the users to give it a try to the new controller. It will take some amount of time of testing, and the testing that you've mentioned is just an initial part. I would still want to somehow protect the users from being thrown into a new controller that we, like, no matter how much testing we will put into it at this point in time, it still will be a rather limited amount of testing. I want to have the controller being tested by actual users to ensure that when we do the switch, it is it was more or less verified by other people, not just us. That's the fear that I have. I know the state of the current controller, but still, like Matt said, it is something that people
I'll
are
defer
aware
to
of.
the people who are going to be actually implementing the controller about the cost of double maintenance for adding new things.
I'm well aware of that one.
So.
So the choices we have are to have two controllers. The new controller would be under a flag, alpha flag, so that customers have to explicitly enable it. And then once it moves to beta, that'll be the default. Can we deprecate the old controller at the beta?
So I would expect this to be a feature gate. And so the way feature gates work, they start in alpha disabled by default. Then they move to beta and are typically enabled by default at that point. And then when they graduate to GA, they get locked to be true. And we announce that this feature is now GA and the feature gate will be removed in the next release. And so it's just a monotonic, like a ratcheting enablement And so there's nothing to deprecate. Like once it's locked to true, we can delete the old controller code.
Okay, so that's final. So when it is in beta, do the customers have an option to turn it off?
Yeah, so a beta feature gate can be disabled.
Okay, so
whether a particular distribution exposes that knob to a user is up to that distribution. So at the point where we promote a feature to beta, we document like this feature is now enabled by default. You still have the option to disable it either because you know of a specific problem, or if you encounter a problem, you have the option to turn it off and go back to the old behavior. But then know that the intent is to get it to GA in X release, and at that point it will be on by default. So
okay. In the interest of time, one last question is, so I'm clear on the controller part. So do we do this lockstep with the API as well?
So while the API is in beta, like before it has gone to a GA API, if you are making changes that are additive and backwards compatible, so things like reflecting more status into the API, those additive changes can be made in the existing API versions. Typically, you make the additions you want, you get them tested. Once you have user feedback on sort of the final shape of the API, then we typically promote it to GA with no changes.
Got it, okay. So, but the API could go GA a little earlier than the controller.
That was one of the things that was previously argued against, because the controller implementation was what was holding it back from going GA, not the API.
Yeah.
We've long been happy enough with the API.
Got it, okay.
It's the controller implementation.
Okay, so they will...
Yeah, GA has multiple implications. Some of them are API stability, some of them are scale and bugs and things like that. And so I would say the current controller does not meet the standard for scale and bugs. So, yeah.
So, so I added a bunch of test cases. Nan, who's on the call, added a bunch of test cases. We want to make sure that, I mean, these are just starting. We will obviously add more, but do you see something significant that's missing? Please go ahead and comment on the cap. We'll include those as well. Like for scale testing, we just threw in a number like 5K, but there should ideally be like 15% of the HCD capacity or storage capacity, so that allows for a pod. I mean, gives some space for pod objects and job objects as well.
Right. I would work with SIG scalability on that question in particular. We did similar things when we were defining scale limits for custom resources. Right. And for custom resources, the dimensions we found helpful were like the average size of the custom resource, because the schema is arbitrary. For these, it might be things like the interval, so the rate at which the cron job is going to spawn jobs, and then the scale of those jobs, just to define parameters that we have tested.
Okay, so more specifically, if you have any comments on, do we need to measure the jitter or the latency in scheduling? Is that an important?
I mean, for a resource whose job is to make sure things run at specific time intervals, that seems like an important thing to at least describe the guarantees around. And definitely describe the policies. Like if the controller manager is not running when a job is supposed to be fired, like it doesn't matter how good our code is, if it's not running, it's not going to create the job. And so being really clear about what happens when it starts back up. Does it?
Yeah, so there are a bunch of PRs, open issues that we are trying to fix and then test against. Right. And so those are also listed here. And that includes one of the cases where the controller was stopped, and someone had a use case where they keep stopping the controller to save resources.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. So the things we need to do are define very clearly what the policies are if the controller is not running when it should be starting a job, and then test that what we describe actually happens. So if we say it skips jobs, then we should test that that's what happens. If we say it like spawns them, we should test that. If we say you have an option, we should test the option. And then specifically for someone monitoring their cluster, that seems like a good place to add metrics. So either for skipped jobs or jobs that were spawned, quote unquote late.
Okay.
Those seem like really good metrics that someone might want to monitor to say, is my cron job controller healthy?
Got it. Okay. Okay. So we do have some metrics that I can add the. Oh, sorry. I shouldn't.
All right. I know we're taking a lot of time on this. So
All right. Yeah, I'm good.
No, this is okay because it's one of those things we need to get ironed out. One of the things that I remember is, if I remember right anyway, there are people who are running more than 20,000 cron jobs.
Okay.
And so the scale, at least, is going up high like that, tens of thousands.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Got it. That's good to know.
Oh, so there's when talking about the job being late, being spawned by cron job controller, I need to take into account that the user can modify deadline for starting a job. It is called starting deadline seconds. I remember that we had something like that, but I did not remember the field name.
Oh.
So there is an option for a user to specify a bigger
Starting
deadline seconds.
Yeah.
And the default was around, there's no default per se, but if I remember correctly, in the original proposal, when we put together the cron jobs, we phrase it as its approximation in starting the cron job around the time it was supposed to be.
Okay. So got it. So I know there is a starting deadline, which if you miss, you don't start the job. But there's that's pretty much it. So do you need jitter around this? So some timers have a jitter configuration which prevent the thundering hertz, which is acceptable for that object. It's not in the cron job spec. Like maybe I'll discuss it offline. I'll put it in the KEP and then we can discuss it.
Okay. I need to reread the KEP. I read it last time in December.
Yeah, so we made significant.
I missed the part that you updated it recently. I'll have a look at it tomorrow morning.
But thank you. Okay, I'm all done. Thanks.
All right, thank you. Is there anything else on this?
No, nothing from me.
Perfect.
And feel free to reach out to me or to Mache or anyone between. Like you don't have to wait till the next SIG Apps meeting. If you want to set up like a dedicated time slot once we get a chance to look at this and add some comments, feel free to set that up.
So is Slack or like email?
You can ping in Slack and we can set up a Zoom call or something like that.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you. All right, thanks, guys.
Thank you. The next thing that we have up on here is about pod disruption budget issues and PRs that need to be reviewed. Do we have someone on who wanted to talk about that?
Yeah. So we were working on taking PDBs to GA. There's a link here to the project which tracks these issues. And I'm just taking this opportunity to ask for more people to look at those issues and PRs. I think some of the PRs are relatively small and straightforward. Others have deeper sort of questions that needs more discussion before we can decide if we want to do something about it, or if so, what should it be?
I think we have just one of the approvers and reviewers on for that code today, and that would be you, Maciej.
I had a discussion just past week about PDBs. I think there's some outstanding issue. Not sure if it's even described well. It was brought to my attention just like I'm saying last week. I'll have a look at it, and then I'll go through the changes that we have. Do you have any time frames for when you're planning to GA PDBs? Is it like 118 thing, or it's rather you're trying to pave the road towards that one in one of the next releases?
I think if it's, well, as soon as possible, but if we can make or address all issues and make all the changes we need for 118, that's great. If not, my plan is to keep pushing and then see if we can get into 119. So it depends really on how long it takes to get through the outstanding issues.
Yeah, I would mostly like to see agreement on what should happen for each of these items. Once we actually understand and can define what should happen, then we can estimate how long it'll take to get there. The difficult thing is it's been so long since this was designed and implemented that I don't have a clear picture of what the intent was for some of these options and behaviors. And it's actually pretty tricky to find people who remember the context and remember why decisions were made. And so it's very much looking at like design by reverse engineer the implementation, which is difficult. So Maciej, are you the one to ask questions of, or is Ken Owens, or like I think what Morten and I are looking for?
I think Ken would be better.
Okay.
I was not involved when PDBs were created. It was just brought to my attention just recently, and we had.
Was David Oppenheimer involved?
Yeah, I've talked to Matt here about some of the things. Some of the things he just said it's too long ago, and I think David also was involved at some of it. So we're meaning to reach out to him too.
Okay. Yeah, what I'm looking for is sort of laying out the grid of fields that we have in the API object today. So we have sort of minimum pods and maximum unavailable pods, and each of those can be absolute numbers or percents. So that's the grid of inputs. And then we have a whole set of potential pods that we can encounter. And I think if we just make a table of, for this input and this type of pod, this is how we behave. And then we can shop that around and get feedback on that. There are a lot of really undefined cases today.
I mean, basically what I'm hearing from Jordan is start a cap describing the outcomes, and then maybe it would be reasonable to send it out to
I mean, there was the GA cap, and it basically proposed graduating it mostly as is. And then when we started surveying, like I said, the GA doesn't just mean the API. It also means like we've looked at the outstanding bugs and we're confident that they're minor or addressable. And so that's where we are now. So I think an update to the CAP that adds this specification and documentation, both so we can make sure we've implemented it and tested it, but also so users who want to use this thing can reason about what it is they're even using.
And then gather feedback from users across the board. That's why the email to Cube Dev would be a good starting point.
I have a document with some of the description of what happens with different inputs and different pods, but I can try and turn that into more of a spreadsheet that might be easier to read.
Yes. Yeah. Definitely something like that would be helpful. I'm trying to look through the authors list for the controller, and it's not consistent. Like, so many people touched it over the past almost 4 years that yeah, that's basically one of the reasons why it is where it is currently.
All right. I pinged Ken to let him know he's not here. He wasn't able to make it today. But that would be somebody to chat with about this as well. He always seemed to know more about it than I did. So
Yeah.
what else do we need on PDBs here today?
From my perspective, we'll be identifying people and like the concrete things we need to nail down. So if we can leave with that, I'm happy. What about you, Morten?
Yeah, I can take that up on and try to update the CAP with some of the information. I think some of these things are discussed in a couple of issues and PRs around, so try to get that all into one place so people can find it. And then, yeah, see if we can get the right people to look at it, and then hopefully decide on how we want this to work.
Yeah, it would also be helpful to point to any existing documentation, whether that's like website documentation or API documentation, so we know if we've made specific promises to users already, like explicit ones, then we should definitely honor those. And then in this grid of inputs and outputs, describing what the current behavior is would be helpful as well, because that's sort of an implicit promise to users about how it should behave. And in the absence of clear communication, they will expect it to keep behaving that way. So when the current behavior is it errors and blocks all your operations, like that's a thing that we could maybe improve and make stop erroring. But even there, we need to be careful because it's possible that someone is counting on it blocking operations. So describing the current behavior would be a great starting place.
Yep, I'll do that. Yeah, I think that was all for this topic.
All right. Well, then that's all of our discussion. So we can have a quick time of open discussion. Did anybody have any other topics to discuss today? Going once, going twice. I see somebody's got a hand raised.
Yes. Hi. My name is Ashish. I am working on the execution hooks, implementation of the execution hooks. So I wanted to kind of get folks to look at an ongoing PR that I have and kind of solicit feedback and make progress. So feel free to take a look at the PR. I put a link to the PR on the meeting notes. So that was just an announcement from my end. I'm happy to walk through the changes or what is the status. So let me know if folks are interested in doing that.
So could you describe the goal of this as goal of acquisition hook? What use cases it's trying to solve?
So am I unmuted? Yeah, I'm unmuted. So the whole idea is, so we have pod lifecycle hooks, right? So things to run before starting a pod and things to run when a pod is terminated. But there is this specific scenario, say you want to snapshot a volume that's mounted by a pod. So before you actually can do that, I apologize for the background noise. Let me know if it's getting too much. So if a pod has a volume mounted and you want to snapshot that volume, you want we want to first queries the database or the thing that is writing to the volume, make it stop writing, and then take a snapshot to kind of make it in an application consistent snapshot, so that the application can just restart from where it picked up. So to perform such operations, you want to be able to run specific commands on a pod or inside a container, more specifically.
Okay.
And those are the, so that is where an execution hook would come into place. So somebody would create an execution hook, which is associated with a hook action. And uh, when the execution hook controller sees such an object being created, it will go and run that action on the behalf of the user. Um, there was also a cap that is associated with this. Let me link that
I
as
just
well.
dropped it into chat here if somebody wants to open up the cap on it. It originally came out of SIG storage, but it made more, and I think they wanted to use it for things like backups. And but it's far more of an apps related thing because there's more things you can do with it than storage, which is how the discussion landed over here.
Okay, thank you.
So this is the cap.
Wonderful. Okay. Yeah, we just want to make sure about the guarantees of or the security aspects of running hooks.
Yeah. So
part.
yeah, as an initial V1 Alpha 1 implementation, I think we'll be using pod exec APIs to do this.
Okay.
But in subsequent releases, we want to use the kubelet. We want to make the kubelet run this for us.
Got it. Okay. Would be, I'm curious on, okay, these are hooks that would be running inside the user pods, but there's no way we can guarantee that it doesn't exfiltrate data or anything. Those are separate concerns, right? From a security.
Yes. Yeah, the user then is responsible for or can control what the hook action can do.
Right. So it's a trusted. So this should be considered as the hook should be properly reviewed and approved, and should be considered as admin operations.
Yes, the hook and the hook action and the execution hook themselves are going to be Kubernetes API objects. They'll be CRDs.
Right.
That a controller will watch for and act upon. I think Xing was about to say something.
No, I didn't raise my hand.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Yeah.
All right, thank you. We'll review it offline. Thanks for the context.
Yeah, sure. I'll link this in the meeting notes as well.
So one small feedback or one feedback from the repo that you linked is maybe you can split your commits into two pull requests, where the first pull request would be the CRD definition and the second pull request could be the controller implementation. If you can, if not. Okay.
Sure, I think that's a fair suggestion. That's a good point. I will try to segregate the two.
Okay.
I was iterating with the two in parallel, kind of making changes as necessary. But I think you make a fair point. I will segregate those changes that way.
Yeah, pull requests that touch and alter that many files and are that large can be very difficult for reviewers to just end up jumping in and reviewing. And so something smaller and more bite-sized may get more eyes on it.
Yep, understand. I will kind of break it up.
All right, thanks, sir.
Sure.
Thank you. Did anybody have anything else to discuss today? Going once, Going twice. All right, everyone. Thank you, and we will be back here in 2 weeks. See y'all online.
All right, thanks.
Thanks. Bye.